Hello and welcome to Edumate.tv. I'm Chetan Sharma. We learn to live and live to learn in what has turned out to be an unprecedented situation, an unprecedented pandemic. With history being written across the geography of Mother Earth, and a minor virus that's created a major catastrophe, making each and every one of us rewind, rethink, reboot, restructure, reformat, re-strategize before we rebuild a new normal, a new future. In the world of higher education, they say, the only thing constant is change. In a pandemic, they say, the only thing certain is uncertainty. It's important to consider that all progress must come from change. But it's equally important to understand that all change does not lead to progress. And that's what makes the situation rather unique in its set of challenges as well as opportunities. And the only way to encounter and to evolve with this is through one single human trait, and that's the trait of wisdom. Wisdom emanating from the past experience in education, and wisdom to be able to understand the future, anticipate it, embrace it, and evolve with it. And that's why we have our very wise Chancellor. Well, today we have a very special guest, and a very wise one, may I add, is Jamshed Bharucha, who is the founding Vice Chancellor of the SAI University. What a pleasure to have you on our show, sir.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Let's start from the very beginning. And the beginning for most, given that we're all living almost new lives, has been March of 2020. How has life been for SAI University from that month on?
Well, as you know, SAI University is a brand new university. It was established by an act of the Tamil Nadu government, and we are preparing to launch for our first batch of students to enter in 2021-22. So fortuitously, we are very hopeful that there will already be a vaccine by the time our first batch arrives. And meanwhile, it gives us a chance, as we plan our opening, grapple with what a future might be in higher education. I personally believe that even though we will have a vaccine, we will see a new acceptance of technological communications in education, where the residential model, which of course is the most enriching one for university education, will be enhanced and supplemented by online offerings. One thing we are certainly going to be expecting to be leaders in India is beaming in distinguished guests into the classrooms, even as the classrooms are residential. Because of COVID, there's a new acceptance of this kind of interaction, and I think particularly on the international stage, it opens up vast opportunities for students and professors in India to be much more seamlessly connected with their counterparts abroad. Of course, there's nothing like getting on an airplane and going, but just as we really embrace the telephone and so on, now we embrace online communications. I think the future of higher education after the pandemic is behind us is really, really exciting.
Right. I think you could probably supplement the word acceptance with access, because
Yes.
It's the access to the outside world, the wisdom which you can generate from experiences of several credible minds, which you wouldn't have access to even if you wanted to accept it. So that, of course, makes it very fortuitous. And I like the word you use, fortuitous, which is really very effective and very representative of your university, simply because you didn't have the baggage of the past.
Yes.
Right? So you have everything to look forward to in the future. So that's
Right.
up, light and tight, to show your might, as they say. But it also allows you to observe unconditionally all that's taking place in 2020 during the COVID pandemic. So how has that observation and experience been for you?
It's been a great learning experience. We always should continue to learn. And I think we need to continue to innovate. So I'm actually sitting in the United States right now, and the fact that we're having this conversation so easily shows what possibilities there are for building a truly global, a truly international university in India. And certainly our aspiration at Sai University in Chennai is to be just that, where there are no national borders when it comes to the spread of ideas, when it comes to the spread of education. I would say that with the national education policy in India, this is India's time in higher education. Okay, India has now established itself as a leading economy in the world, as a superpower. Everybody, when I was growing up in India, India was seen as a basket case, economic basket case. There was very little hope. People went abroad looking for opportunity. Now India is seen as an extremely dynamic country economically, but also culturally, and as an exporter of brains. By setting up new universities in India that are at the standards or even surpass the standards of the foreign universities to which many of our children go, I think we enter a new era in India. And I think the National Education Policy, NEP, opens the door for that. It is long in coming. The system has needed disruption. It is now being disrupted. I think the COVID crisis spurs the disruption in forcing us to think more innovatively about hybrid models of education, about just how important education is, that it cannot be stopped. So I think that for India, this is one of the most exciting moments in higher education, probably in 50 or 70 years. And I just hope that the NEP gets implemented, and not every aspect of it is going to make everybody in education happy. But by and large, the liberalization, the opening up of the sector, the move away from specializing too early in university education to a broader education, preparing citizens, preparing leaders, that's what's going to happen, and I'm very, very enthusiastic about that. I'm very fortunate to have this opportunity. I spent my career in the US at top universities, and I'm fortunate to have been approached by Mr. K.V. Ramani, who's a technology entrepreneur in Chennai, who wanted to start a world-class global university with innovative pedagogy, moving away from the mugging and exams and so on of the past into a much more active and interactive form of learning, top-class, world-class research, and a whole new way of thinking about. So we're, of course, the COVID is an unfortunate setback, but for us, I think we are ready to launch.
It's very reassuring to hear what you say, particularly about the economic opportunities of this great country. But that having been said, I think I would like to at least play the devil's advocate, and that comes with good reason, which all of us have experienced in the past, and that's typically the conflict between economic logic, rational and opportunity, versus political will. Well, this time around, because I don't think we've ever been bereft of good policy making. What we've always fallen short is of sound implementation, and that is bound to be tested, particularly when you use the word disruptive. So while you talked about reaping demographic dividend, you're also up against a digital divide, which could throw up in disparities. So there are all sorts of new challenges also which come to the fore while we deal with with this metamorphosis. Is there anything that you'd like to you'd see as something which would challenge you in your thinking, or something you think would be an impediment going forward for 2020?
Having gone through the system myself, it has been too bureaucratic. It has been too constrained and restricted by rules and regulations and requirements and so on. But the past is the past. What I like about where we are today in higher education is that there is new space now for private universities to emerge who can innovate. The state private universities, which are regulated primarily by the state, and so our university, Sai University, was one of two of the first state private universities to be established in the state of Andhra Pradesh. So it's an opportunity to lead. It's an opportunity to be pioneers. We don't feel very constrained, and even if the new national education policy takes a while to be implemented, we don't feel constrained in the broad areas of education. So we're defining a new model. Yes, there will be obstacles and frustrations as the policy starts to be implemented, and there are always obstacles to be, bureaucratic obstacles mostly. Now, you mentioned the digital divide. That's a very important point, and for India to really reap the demographic dividend of its tremendously large young population, we have to act quickly and boldly in the area of education at all levels. A lot of work needs to be done to make Indian universities as strong and desirable as many of the universities abroad. I think that's the one piece that's missing, and I think if we do that, if we increase dramatically the capacity of high quality higher education, being in higher education, that's my focus. Of course, we have to do it at all levels of education, pre-K to 12. Increase the quality and expand that to provide access to most people, regardless of their financial ability, and provide them with the digital access. Key, absolutely key. Every Indian household, in order to truly educate their children, now has to have good bandwidth connectivity, has to have some kind of devices to connect with, and yeah, that's an important challenge. But if we do that, and if we innovate and we move beyond the strictures of the traditional university in India, I think you will see 1,000 flowers blooming in the country.
I recognize with great appreciation when you talk about the need for high quality education, space, scale, and expansion, innovation. But all that comes at a price. We got to recognize that as well. Now, at the end of it all, you've got to pay your bills while you're running an institution, right? So it's not entirely a pro bono exercise. It may have its seed in philanthropy and nobility, but it's got to still, you've got to grease the wheels. Now, when you come to a situation like that, typically what would you resort to? Either you require higher funding from the government to be able to support that price, or you need to have an economic boom, to say the least. And a double digit is what we're expecting on the GDP, but we're far from that. Even whatever happens, like say we're having a sharp recovery, hopefully from the COVID, that's what's expected tomorrow, I mean in the year to come. Still, is it enough to be able to drive a price level of affordability for the quality that you want to offer? Or will we continue to see the mismatch? Because even today, as we speak, several universities are finding themselves in an economic crisis, so to speak, because fees are not being paid. There's scant recognition of the online education, as it were, and people are willing to take even a gap year.
Well, absolutely. As you know, in the United States, higher education is in deep trouble because of the cost equation. The tuition costs have gone up to the point where fewer and fewer families can afford it. Colleges and universities are in a lot of trouble, and COVID has almost pushed many of them over the edge. The financial equation has not reached that point in India by far. We're just getting going because the private university concept is a relatively new one. There are normally 3 sources of funding, and one has to balance those. There's philanthropy, as you mentioned. There's tuition fees, and there's government support. We're fortunate at Sai University to be funded by a generous sponsor, donor, philanthropist, Mr. K.V. Ramani. So there is new wealth created in India that is finding itself into philanthropic causes such as new universities. We're not alone. There are others that you know cropping up. Many newly minted wealthy individuals and families are making those contributions. I think that's a good new model in India because previously philanthropy did not play a role in Indian higher education, and we were only dependent on the government and on tuition. So that's a new source. The amounts are huge, but you can't count on philanthropy for ongoing costs. Usually it's a startup fund, and then you have to become self-sustaining. And to be self-sustaining, yes, you do need tuition fees. And the way to do it is to structure it so that of the students who merit admission to your university, and our university will have a very high standard for admission, those who can afford it will pay what the education is worth, which is quite a lot. And those whose families cannot afford it, but if they merit it, then we provide scholarships. Okay, so that's the financial aid model, that merit-based admissions and financial need-based scholarships, so that any kid who is meritorious and has potential, we would seek to find a way to help fund by balancing the costs with scholarships. And that's a model that's just taking hold in India. As for government support, the private universities aren't looking for government support, and that's, I think, a good thing, because I think the government needs to be supplemented by private resources. However, on the side of research, yes, the government should dramatically increase its funding of basic and applied research on a peer-reviewed merit base, and the NEP calls for that.
Well, it's an important point that you made about government infusion of funds, and while it may not be directly impacting you, it would indirectly impact you, because if we're able to dramatically improve the quality of primary education, so
Yes.
the quality of students you get into your system would anyway improve. You'd be able to enhance and leverage that even better. So it will make life more enriching for you. So there is that indirect impact on you as well. You mentioned 2 very, very valuable points. One was, of course, you talked about affordability. The second, you talked about financial aid through merit, for the meritorious people. Now, this having been said, this is, of course, one part of the solution. For instance, I mean, you're focusing on liberal arts and newer age education, which is, of course, something which a lot of universities have begun talking about right now, which is also coming from the fact that one seems to be capacitated with the conventional mode of view, the engineerings and the doctors and the architects and the accountants and what have you. So obviously people look way beyond that because there are not enough opportunities out there. That's only one part of the problem. The larger part is that even if there is affordability for the course that you offer, which is a new course, are there enough jobs being created for those courses for them to be able to spend that money? I think that is a larger question, a larger challenge in the minds of the job seeker and the career counselor as well. What would you like to say to that?
Particularly for parents, the question is, what's the job going to be at the end of that? I think it's a chicken and egg issue. The jobs of today are not going to be there tomorrow. Okay? I think most people in leadership positions in business and education recognize that. Okay. Already, many Indian engineers are not employed in engineering, and many of them who have very good jobs their jobs are not in engineering. They're maybe in finance, and so the universities have not served the economy well in the past by preparing people to be too specialized too early for jobs that really aren't there in that way. If you look at the Googles and the Microsofts and the Apples and the young people they hire straight out of college, they're not necessarily engineers. They're not necessarily computer science majors. They may be majors in philosophy or in English or something else. And so the point is that when you expand your thinking about this, you turn the whole thing on its head. What we are producing are job creators. Okay, we're going to be producing people who have vision, who will start companies, who will expand the visions of the companies in which they are. And I think the corporate leaders in India are yearning to see more applicants for even their technical coding jobs, more applicants who are independent thinkers, problem solvers, people who are ready to solve new problems, not just the textbook problems that they learned to solve in college. New problems, to exercise leadership, to come up with new ideas and to develop those new ideas. That is the future. So I think a number of new universities coming up in India to produce the kernels of a future economies in India. And I can guarantee you they will also be more than highly qualified for the traditional jobs at the same time, because they will have communication skills, they will have analytical skills, they will have problem-solving skills, which are lacking now in the Indian job market. All the employers are telling us that. They say, yeah, some students may have gotten the marks because it's all exam-based, right? But then they show up for an interview or a small group discussion as part of the job application, and they have no experience with that. So we're going to focus on oral and written communication from day one, undergraduate. Confidence building, there's also highly unevenness in the confidence with which students present themselves, in part because of their upbringing. They will come to the job market confident, worldly, extremely knowledgeable, broad thinking, critical thinkers, as well as being well trained in whatever field they're in. Even though we're going to be liberal arts and sciences, we will be embracing technology as well. In fact, more so. We will be expanding our technology education into all fields. So we seek to attract students who may have passions in the arts. And people may be telling them there are no jobs in the arts, but they'll get the computational skills in the background as well. And there'll be plenty of jobs already. And they'll be also job creators.
If I'm going to, let's say, amalgamate what you've spoken about. We talked about, India's demographic dividend. We talked about, the advantages of a boom in the Indian economy, which the world also sees. We also talked about, the governments need to spend a little more, right? On research and overall education, per se, as a spender, as a part of its GDP. Also, we've talked about the fact that we need to shift to newer opportunities, create new leaders, and all. If I get this all together, for us to really get the advantage to ensure that we have a strong, scalable and sustainable job-oriented education market, what we need to do is all of us collectively invest in Brand India.
Yes.
Because whether we look at overseas companies coming to invest in India,
right,
or as Indian entrepreneurs, or as Indian job seekers looking to remain in India for the brand India and to grow it, whichever way you look at it, all of us have a high stake in the promotion of brand India and lesser dependency on the overseas branding vis-a-vis India. How do you see that in context?
What's amazing to see is how the Indian brand has shot up, largely because of India's emergence in the 1990s and after that as a software exporter. And this has saved India, really. The brand is phenomenal. You know, people, when you say India today, here, they go, wow. Because they know the brain power, they know the talent, and they have watched, you know, the country's rise. They know it's the largest democracy in the world. That's very impressive. I don't think that China in the long run can compete with India, even economically, certainly not culturally, or in terms of influence around the world, because India is a democracy, and if it keeps that, you know, then it will not be touchable. I think the education piece has been a weak link in all of this, which is why I'm coming back to engage. And I think you're seeing a lot of the non-resident Indians re-engaging. I also see, coming back to your original point about the jobs, Indian industry leaders are engaging big time in this new era in higher education. And so on our governing board at Sai University, we have Mr. Narayana Murthy, co-founder of Infosys. We have Mr. Mohandas Pai, who was also at Infosys and is associated with education around the country. We have others. It is very important for us to not be an ivory tower anymore. Education, higher education in particular, should not be disconnected from industry. You'll find with the industrial leaders in India, there's a tremendous amount of sophistication and enlightenment in what they see as needed and as the future of the country. And their vision, in my view, is very much in line with what we're trying to do. So industry and higher education, I think, are going to see a renewed partnership. You will see Indian industry take a renewed interest in our graduates in all fields because they'll see the value that this kind of education creates for their companies.
Absolutely brilliant. In fact, you know, my question, upcoming question is going to be why Sai? And you seem to have answered that in that question quite beautifully. I congratulate you for that. So, you know, it's all very well to be in the state that we are in and that the state is obviously a state of questioning, a state of retrospection, of reflection, but also a state of learning, constant learning.
Yes.
So what would you say have been your biggest learnings in the COVID environment?
I would say two. One is, unfortunately, that the rich-poor divide has gotten larger because people who have the resources and are situated in a way in which they can ride out the pandemic by doing their work from home, as we are right now, and who can avoid the congested circumstances in which the spreading of the virus occurs most, are in a much better position, or who can afford the best treatment, the best hospitals, and so on. And for those who are financially not well off everywhere around the world, but particularly in India, where the disparities are huge, this has been a tragedy. And as an educator, of course, it's always on my mind. You know, how can we use education to narrow the gap between the haves and the have-nots? And the COVID has certainly set that back. The second point is a more optimistic one, which harkens back to what I said earlier. I think that the COVID crisis has taught me, the learning I've gotten is that you can build quality education, scalable education methodologies without the residential model. It's important, it's enriching, it's of course in the end the best kind of education you can receive, to go in there and go to college and live in the hostels and be right there. But if you have a pandemic like this, or if you have other kinds of situations may get in the way, or if you can't afford to go to the residential campus, you could still get a fine education using online methods. And after COVID, I would not be one to say let's now enough of Zoom, okay, enough of Google Meets. Let's go back to being in residence. Yes, of course we should go back to being in residence, but we should also at the same time expand the online forums. The technology is only going to get better. These conversations are only going to get more and more realistic with 3D, with augmented mixed reality, with all kinds of things. That's one way in which we can address the digital divide, the socioeconomic divide, bring along people who may not be able to afford to come to go far away, stay in hostels and pay what's needed. So that's hugely liberating. Knowledge should be available to everyone who's motivated to get it.
It brings a lot of sense, and even more, a lot of sensitivity. So thank you for that. Now I'd like our viewers actually to leverage on your learnings and transform that into an advice. So what would be your advice to four very critical stakeholders in the education system? The student, the parent, the teacher, and your fellow Vice Chancellor.
Oh, great, wonderful. To the student, I would say follow your passion. Okay. And because you're going to be best at what you are passionate about, and you're not going to be, in the end, that useful to yourself or any company or anybody if you feel forced into a subject or field that you're not interested in. Okay. The parent, this is maybe subversive advice in some ways, because obviously parents, for good reason, want their children to not take risks. But I would say to the parents, India is much more mature economy today. Relax a little bit, step back, support your children in what they're interested in, and don't try to force them into things that they're interested in, that they're not interested in. They will do better, they'll be happier, you will do better in the long term, and you will be happier. Open your mind, I'd say to both students and parents, open your minds to new models of education, to more interactive, active models of education. That brings us to the third constituency, the faculty. I come from the faculty world, so I can be critical of that constituency. Stop with the lecturing, okay? Or reduce the lecturing. Lecturing will always have a role, but to expect that students are going to be able to concentrate and attend to your every word for 45 minutes at a stretch is it's an obsolete model. Okay, I can guarantee you, as a cognitive neuroscientist, that 80%, 70% of the students sitting in your classroom, when you're just lecturing at them one way, while they may be nodding as if they're paying attention, their minds are elsewhere, particularly undergraduates, because they're adolescents. Okay, and it's a pointless exercise. I think older students are more focused. Make it interactive. Make it active. Call on students. I believe in college, every student in every class should speak at least once. Okay, and if they don't speak voluntarily, they should be cold called. There's nothing like mentioning a student's name to engage the full brain, all of that fantasizing, and their minds might be on movies, or what am I going to eat, or do people like me, blah 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 blah, suddenly are focused. Okay, that's when you get true learning, and that's how you start to shape their ability to think and to communicate clearly, by getting them to communicate their thinking and their processing of ideas. Because if you see the flaws in their thinking or the communication, you can shape it. So I would say that. I would say for the faculty, also reduce the weightage of the high stakes final exam. Okay, use much more continuous and multi-dimensional forms of assessment. Okay, that's what education is really about. Put the student's brain at the center of the learning experience. The student's brain, actually, I'll tell you as a brain scientist, knows how to learn. We as professors don't know how the student's brain wants to learn. Let that drive the learning. And I would say to the fellow vice chancellors, try to get away from policies and practices that universities have just because that's the way it's been. Particularly the college generation today is very different from the when the vice chancellors were in college. Okay, it's a mistake to think that's what I went through, that's what they should go through. Listen to the students, listen to them, and empower them. Give them a chance to discover their talents. Every brain has a unique talent, and it doesn't always fall into your slots and your structures that you've created in your universities. And empower them and support them, and remove many of the academic boundaries between disciplines, or make them more porous. Ideas should go back and forth. Respect your students as adults. And obviously there are boundaries that if they cross, they would need to be penalized, but those are things like safety and civility and so on and so forth, integrity, but be less prescriptive and more there to encourage and support the innate talents that students bring to the table.
At Edumate.tv, we often say that there's only one way to fight the big C of COVID, and that's by 3 C's of being corrective, collective, and creative. And you, Mr. Jamshed Bharucha, have been exactly that and much, much more. I personally have learned so much from your learnings, and it's such a pleasure to put very truly you to be a WISE Chancellor.
Very impressed with your erudition, and many people in the news media who cover education or higher education haven't taken the time to really acquire that background knowledge to engage in these kinds of conversations. I've had many such conversations, and in all countries you say active learning or interactive learning, and it's like it's a completely new idea. It's like, what do you mean by that? And whereas I found in this conversation, you were right there. I think it's wonderful that you're doing this, and that you're creating a dialogue in a very nuanced way, because I think we're going to need the critical thinking role of the media for higher education in India to get to where it should be. So I would encourage you, and I look forward to seeing your shows.